Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm going to continue on with my Goosebumps The Vanishing episode reviews. And for this episode, we're going to look at the fourth one, Monster Blood. Now, when I heard that Monster Blood was getting an adaptation into Goosebumps The Vanishing, I was thinking in my head, this isn't a bad idea necessarily to do, because as somebody who is not really the biggest Monster Blood guy whatsoever, I can definitely see the show possibly improving on the idea, and I thought, why not? But as I watched the episode, I realized quickly that I wasn't a fan of this one. Now, I should also preface this, by the time of me making this review for Monster Blood, I've actually watched the entire show, and I have a whole different perspective than I would if I just would have made an off-cuff reaction review. So I'll say this up front. Monster Blood, maybe next to The Haunted Car, are my two least favorite episodes of the entire season. They're basically bona fide filler episodes in the grand scheme of the story. Both episodes kind of have similar ailments to things I did not enjoy about season one more than the other episodes. But I will say here that for what it is worth, there's some fun moments, and I think maybe the final 10 minutes really do kind of make up for the abysmal rest of the episode. So take that for what you will. And if you have not checked out my other reviews, I'm going to go ahead and reiterate this here. As somebody who just finished the show, and I'm doing individual reviews, and then we'll do a season review by itself at the very end of my series of reviews for this show, I didn't hate it. As a matter of fact, I didn't hate any of these episodes in particular that we're going to talk about. Like I said, this one's my least favorite, but I'm not going in ready to just say I hate this thing, right? And that's how I felt going into the show. You know, I know there's people out there that want reviewers such as myself to completely bash this show because Sony and Disney made it. If you feel that way, you can feel that way, but you can let me know in the comment section. I'm just going to drop you a like and a heart and move on with my day. It's just not worth talking about that kind of stuff because it's just silly. I like to join in the conversation by actually experiencing the material and judging it for itself. And I know this show isn't necessarily made for my tastes and what I want out of the series, but I'm still experiencing it because I'm a Goosebumps fan and I want to see what they're doing with it. You know what I mean? At the same time. So it's a double-edged sword. I get it. This show is nothing like the 90s show. It's nothing like what Goosebumps actually is. But as somebody who wants that instead of this, I could still give it some credit. So take that for what you will, but that's just my thoughts on it. Okay, with that out the way, let's talk about Monster Blood's episode. So this episode starts off with a cold open going about a month into the past, and we get Cece's perspective finally. Cece's kind of been a wallflower in the story for the most part within the first 3 episodes. I mean, she's there, but not really. The only significant things we've seen from her character so far is her stealing some lip gloss from a CVS and making this semi-flirt connection with this other character named Alex. So we get put into her shoes where she's currently at the time, about a month before the season starts, she's at her mother's apartment with her twin brother, and Devin is playing video games, and Cece and him have an awkward conversation. And it turns out that she's going to go to her private school and talk to her debate coach to see if she made it onto this debate team that's nationally accredited that can really help her, get into schools of her choice. And Cece goes into possible avenues of her anxiety about trying to be perfect and being the best at everything that she does. And we'll see that more in the episode later on too. But it turns out she wasn't good enough to make this debate team, and she's flabbergasted as to why. And while we never really know why, I think it's because she's so uptight and possibly because she thinks she's better than everyone else, and maybe the coach might have caught on that, I don't know. But Cece, of course, has a conniption fit and melts down and screams, and then we get cut to the title sequence of the episode. So once we get caught up back into current day in the summer, in Gravesend outside of Brooklyn, New York, where this whole season takes place, Cece is getting ready to go on a interview with a college recruiter that her mom possibly knows, even though we never actually meet the mom in this show whatsoever. I think it's super bizarre that that's even a thing, but yeah, we get to see the mom's apartment and I guess where they come from in this episode, which is cool, I guess. And Cece is anyway, Cece is getting ready to go, make her trek to the subway and take a ride through the city to go speak with that recruiter. Meanwhile, Devin and Devin has plans to go see Frankie, who is really worried about Trey. And I didn't mention it in the Haunted Car review, but Trey was found by Dr. Brewer, played by David Schwimmer, in the military bunker area that Devin and the 94 kids were in the first episode. And Trey has been taken to the hospital, but he's in a catatonic state where he's just giving a 1,000-yard blank stare, and the prognosis is unknown with what's going on with him. But Devin surprises Frankie, who's waiting in the room with her ex-boyfriend, and they get to talking about what's going on and what's happened, and they start to piece together that Trey might have been involved with some certain things that they've been experiencing, and they need some answers involving that. Well, this also plays a thing in the story with the adult characters. Detective Diaz, I know I've said Ortiz in my previous two reviews. I was confusing the actress who plays Detective Diaz because her name is, I think, Ana Ortiz. I was confusing the names there. So it's actually Detective Diaz. And she brings Dr. Brewer into the hospital room to speak with a doctor who might have some information about, Trey's current state, because they need him for questioning for breaking and entering into Dr. Brewer's basement. But the doctor is this gray-haired woman who acts kind of strange, and we see kind of this cutaway shot of her by herself with Trey, and we don't necessarily know what's up with that, right? But there is a sense that the doctor has this idea that Trey is possibly suffering from PTSD, and he's just stuck in shock, and he might be like PTSD mute, or whatever that is called. I don't know what it is, but yeah, essentially he just can't communicate because he's stuck in that state, right? So when she leaves, things get kind of weird because when CJ, who's the delivery guy that we saw in the first 3 episodes, comes to deliver some food, and when this all coalesces as well with Alex that comes into the hospital as well, I guess to check on Trey, it seems that the gray-haired doctor perhaps isn't actually a doctor, and Dr. Brewer is following this lady for some further information and notices that she's peeled off in a Range Rover outside of the hospital. So that perhaps gets built on in a future episode. But the core of the story, going back to Cece, is she is on her way to go to this interview with this college recruiter, and she ends up stumbling into Alex. And Alex, before we see her end up at the hospital later on in the episode, she has this cup that Cece left behind in Trey's car the episode before. And we saw that the cup possibly had something happen to it and might be contaminated with this black gooey venom-like substance. And Alex, as a gesture of friendship, or I guess flirtship, gives her Cece back her cup. And Cece's like, thank you, I need this cup because I use it to drink kombucha. And this is where the whole kombucha gag comes in. Like the lyrics of the final song from episode 1 that mentioned kombucha, it's here. And you'll see why. Because Cece takes this cup to a kombucha shop, and she runs into some of her friends that we actually got to see in a flashback scene of her hanging out with her cohorts, acting like she's, holier than thou and smarter than everyone. And it doesn't really feel like they're actually friends. They're just kind of a clique. And she runs into these girls and they're having some small talk while her kombucha is being made with her cup. But we see that the cup has the black liquid in it, and it's starting to mix with the kombucha inside. And then we see Cece starting to drink it. And she finishes the whole kombucha cup before her interview starts. And when she's sitting down with this woman who seems to be an accomplished debater herself and, has made a living being like a college scout and recruiting the best of the best involving that, Cece starts to have a nosebleed, and this causes her to panic a little bit. And when she looks down from these towelettes that she's holding up her nose with, she notices this black substance. And this, of course, weirds out the interviewer, and Cece goes outside to catch some fresh air. But then she starts hearing some humming, and everything starts to kind of get blurred for her. And then she randomly ends up at her mother's apartment that we saw in the beginning of the episode. And she just violently vomits this kombucha vomit into this sink in the bathroom and tries to flush it down with water. Well, what ends up happening is, let's just say Cece freaks out after she pukes and doesn't know what to do. So she calls Devin, who's at the hospital with Frankie, CJ, and Alex. And Devin and Frankie go to Devin and Cece's mom's apartment to check on Cece. But Cece, before the help can arrive, starts to notice that whatever she puked into the sink is starting to bulge out of it. And now there's this giant blob monster following her through the apartment, and she runs out into the hallway, sees a neighbor, and tells him to go back inside. There's a monster afoot in the building, and she's chased by the monster into this elevator, where she's essentially trapped inside of. And by the time her brother and Frankie get there to help, she's kind of stuck in the elevator because of the blob monster putting so much weight on top of it. And luckily, she's saved out of the elevator by the two before the elevator crashes down to the bottom of the floor. And then, once the characters think they're out of it for a little bit and they don't have to deal with whatever just happened anymore, they go into the subway to catch a ride back to Gravesend over in Brooklyn. And while they're talking down there, Devin and Cece have a heart-to-heart about what happened with Cece. And that's kind of a cool thing to have with the characters, even though it's a little bit forced, because throughout the majority of the show so far, they don't really seem that close. They kind of seem opposites. But this is the first time where you start to see them kind of feel like they're equals to each other. And the teens hop on the subway thinking that everything's okay, but they're, of course, ambushed by this kombucha monster blood monster from the sink earlier, and it engulfs the subway, stops the rail car, and they have to essentially find a way out of it, and specifically for Cece, try to escape, what's going to happen for her sake, right? But once they get out of that situation, everything seems fine and dandy until at the very end of the episode, where we see that they got a ride because of what they saw with the monster blood. They like, this has to be associated with the military base, and they figure that it's better to go there and catch a ride there with like a Lyft driver to see if they can find any more answers down there and give the information back to their friends, because ever since they went down there, due to Devin's dare in the first episode, stuff has been pretty weird, right? But when they go there, they realize that the twins' dad, Dr. Brewer, is there with a hazmat suit on, and they're completely freaked out that their father is there. And before we get to find out any more information, perhaps the episode fades to black. So if you manage to sit through that whole plot synopsis, I probably should have told you beforehand, but my reviews work best if you haven't seen the episodes. So hopefully you watch the episodes. Oh, actually, my reviews work best if you have seen the episodes. I don't know why I said haven't, but if you have seen them, they work better, right? So if you haven't seen the episodes, please go watch that, or watch them before you hear me talk about them that way. But anyways, ramble aside, let's talk about it. So this episode to me was kind of boring. There's a thing about this show as a whole, even going back to season 1, and I mentioned this in Haunted Car. There's what you call useless information and useful information, right? Information that you think, or that will most likely have some payoff by the end, and some information that you can tell is just padding and filler. I can tell you from watching the whole show, there's a lot of useless information in this episode, like Cece's debate team thing. is just there to characterize her. And this is what this show is known to do. They'll give a whole episode to a certain side character and flesh them out, and then they abandon them, and then they go the whole Scooby-Doo route by the last 3 or 4 episodes sometimes. It's no different here. And to be honest, Cece is not that intriguing of a character. She's kind of like whatever. You know, she's not necessarily hateable, but she's just so generic, you know, and she has this aspect to her about her anxiety, but the show really doesn't do a good job at fleshing that out, and we don't really see that be a major role after the point of this episode, because once this event happens, all the anxiety just magically goes away, and it is what it is. It's what you call inconsistent writing, which I don't doubt from this show whatsoever to be the case most of the time, but it's prevalent here in this episode with Cece's character writing. And to be honest, there's just so many bridge points in this episode that it literally just feels like filler. Like, this is the first time we get to meet this gray-haired woman that plays a role later on in the season. This is the first time that we see Dr. Brewer actually go down and do his own investigation, or seemingly that he's down there doing his own real investigation down in the military bunker. But like I said, other episodes expand on it better, and you really only need this episode to kind of bridge the gap for that. So the showrunners, I guess, had to figure out something to do with this episode, and since they needed a book to adapt, they thought, hey, you know what? You know, Black Goop, why not make Monster Blood? And you know what they did to make Monster Blood here? They literally made Cece hooked on kombucha and turned Monster Blood into kombucha vomit. If you're a Monster Blood fan or massive stan out there, I think they made Monster Blood a little sacrilegious. Kombucha vomit, really? It's so stupid, but I guess the scenes that we do get with it, especially in the subway, are pretty good. So it uses some good horror with the monster, but as far as like it being a standalone story and being something worthwhile for the masses, I would say that this ain't it, y'all. Going back into the will they, won't they relationship thing with Cece and Alex is prevalent here. Seeing the whole Devin and Frankie flirtmance thing that's going on in the show is prevalent here. This has a lot of focus on that in this episode for some reason as well, thinking on it. But I will say, once you get over that first like 20 or so minute hurdle where it's just like basically nothing interesting is happening, it gets kind of good, you know. And I do think that there are some salvageable moments, like with the Cece connecting with Devin thing in the subway, or just the subway scene. But then again, it's mostly just filler, right? There's nothing here too consequential to the story, other than, like I said, those certain things that maybe play a role in later episodes. But other than that, there's not a lot here to really praise. I don't really have much else to say with this episode, other than for its pace, it could have been a little better, but it is one of the shorter episodes. I could be a little more forgiving on that, and I do kind of value that when I'm thinking about this one here. I do think that for the most part, the action, when it's there, it keeps you engrossed, so that is another saving grace. But other than that, this one is just kind of mid. You know what I mean? Mid writing, mid characterization stuff, mid plot progression. There's barely any focus on the core story, which is the mystery of the missing 1994 kids. That is the actual story of this season. And anytime, pretty much, that we get to venture outside of that storyline, it's almost always filler or unneeded expository stuff to kind of help connect characters or build on characters, right? And this sadly was one of those episodes to me, because, mild spoiler alert, you never see this Monster Blood monster pop up ever again. And you never see the car pop up again. You never see any of these things that we saw creature-wise in the first 4 episodes, I should say, come back again. So there's that. But this one, I think, is the one that suffers the most out of the first 4. I was on the fence whether I wanted to give this episode, on a 5-star scale, a 2.5 or a 2.75 out of 5 stars, which for me, for this show, is kind of like an okay rating, because this show, in my opinion, is not made for kids. I don't have a 1-point curve given to these episodes. There's no kitty gloves. I'm treating it like young adult/adult material. For that, I'd probably give this episode maybe like a 2.5 out of 5 stars, which is a low okay. Kind of pushing towards meh. A meh is below that a little bit, and then anything below meh is just a work jack. But yeah, 2.5 out of 5 stars is where I feel comfortable with it. It's not necessarily the worst thing ever. It's just the most slumpy episode, in my opinion. I found myself really bored with this one. I wasn't really as invested as I should have been. I had to take a couple pause breaks with it, and that's not good. And I saw myself doing that a lot in season 1 with some of the expository episodes there. And I should say this up front. Monster Blood, at least this episode, some people might be shocked when I say that this episode is filler, because in their minds, they're thinking back on season 1 that had 10 episodes, and they're like, give yourself Goosebumps or Viewer Beware. Those are the real filler episodes, or Dummy Part 2. And I get that to a degree, but that season decided to dump all the Harold Biddle stuff in 5 and 7, basically. So the reason why that comes across as filler is because majority of the story wasn't even focused on that up until that point. Here, the story has been from the beginning about the mystery in this black goo that comes from the ground inside of this military bunker, right? The Monster Blood is just a side quest monster, and all this episode is a bona fide side quest in the overall story. You can cut this episode out, and minus a few small scenes that you can honestly put into either episode 3 or even episode 5 right after it, you really don't need this one. It's just here to be the vehicle to expand on Cece, and that's it. So take that for what you will, but yeah, it's okay for what it is. It's not the worst thing ever from this show by any means, but it's just pretty mid. That's just my opinion. Some people might disagree, but that's how I feel. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Goosebumps The Vanishing's Monster Blood episode. Let me know down in the comment section, what did you think about this episode? Did you love it? Did you hate it? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.